Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Thursday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The team is 1-0. The Lakers are buying in, and JJ Redick hates new basketballs. Find out why. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always free and never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers, all of whom, Andy, are basking in the glow of a 1-0 start. The first time Lakers fans could say this for almost a decade.
To put this even further in perspective, and my favorite thing to do is to frame the passage of time through pop culture. This was the number one movie of the week when the Lakers, before Tuesday night, had last won a season opener. Boo, a Madea Halloween, part of the Tyler Perry Madea franchise, not to be confused with Boo 2, a Madea Halloween, which came out in 2017. Side note, Tyler Perry, low-key rich as bleep. The movie that Boo, a Madea Halloween dislodged from the number one spot was The Accountant with Ben Affleck and Anna Kendrick. Terrible movie. Later that year, Moana and the Star Wars Rogue One movie was released. Also in pop culture throughout 2016, Harambe the Gorilla became an icon. The first Deadpool movie was released. Many incels were outraged over a Lady Ghostbusters movie. Beyonce released the album Lemonade.
I was more outraged because as a Ghostbusters fan, I didn't think it was very good.
It wasn't very good, but I didn't care that it was women in it.
I don't object to a women cast Ghostbusters.
Let me tell you, the latest revamp with Paul Rudd, who is a man.
Very much a man. Not
also
funny.
not good. Not good either. I'd argue it's even less funny.
Yeah. And I will say this too, Andy. Rogue One, second best Star Wars movie.
Quite possibly. That was a while ago. That was the last year until Tuesday that the Lakers had won a season opener.
Yeah, it's been a minute. So that is part of the reason that Lakers fans are excited. Do want to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Of course, we talked, Andy, a lot about some of the highlights from Tuesday's game, most notably, Anthony Davis. That was really cool, and the incredible start that he had to the season. We talked about things like rebounding and all this other stuff, but there was a lot in here in this game that fans are legitimately excited about, including some of the supporting cast, but I also think, too, some of the comments that we're getting about buy-in and excitement about, Anthony Davis talking about the game planning being elite and all these other things. There is a buy-in with the group right now that has come together very quickly, which is obviously critically important on a team run by a first-time coach, first-time coach. So. Yeah, this is a good scenario.
The quote from Anthony Davis, the game plan, the schemes that we had on both ends of the ball, he trusts us. We trust him as far as what he teaches us, what he wants to do on the floor on both ends, and it's our job to execute it. I think we were very prepared tonight. And JJ Redick later said, quote, that's really encouraging as a coach and for our coaching staff that our guys can pick stuff up and then go execute it, talking specifically about how they managed to do this despite a very short window of time to look to install as much as Redick and the staff wanted to on both ends of the floor. That point you made about the speed with which that trust was built. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's early. It's the honeymoon phase. They have dealt with, other than Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood being unavailable, no real adversity. And I can promise over the next 81 games, something's going to come up. But for the time being, that this foundation of trust is there this fast in this context, that is something to feel very, you want to be guarded about the optimism, fine, but it's something to be optimistic about.
Right. And I think, I wasn't necessarily looking for signs that it wouldn't be there. I mean, this is, relatively speaking, par for the course for new coaches. You get the excitement. You often get, not always. I mean, there are
that
times
new car smell.
Right. There are times when, the smell in the new car isn't the right kind. It's not new car smell. It's just smell, not good. And you will see new situations where the growing pains are really there. Like the vibes are like, hey, we believe in blank, but yeah, he's learning. We're all learning together. It's going to be a process, whatever. The amount and the enthusiasm for what they're doing right now is pretty significant. And some of the external, I think we mentioned it on the show, the post game following Tuesday's game, the comments from Chris Finch about Minnesota coach Chris Finch about the offense, what they saw on tape in the preseason, some of the improvements, and players are talking about wrinkles in what they're doing, and so that's really good. And then AD also didn't even really limit the praise just to Redick. He really spread it around the staff, and I think this is also a really important point. The idea that yes, you have a first-time coach in Redick, but AD said having a great staff around him: Nate, Scotty, St. Jean, Lindsey Harding, and Bob, meaning Bob Bayer, I should say. It's been, in my eyes, a pretty easy transition for him. I like him a lot. I like what he's trying to build here and what he's doing. Now it's our job as players to buy into what he's preaching and try to keep this thing going. And I'm going to be really interested in watching what Redick says following games, what he says going into the game in Phoenix, what he says following the game in Phoenix. Against Phoenix, and whether or not, after losses, for example, what does it sound like when the team loses? All of this stuff to keep this energy and to keep this buy-in over what is almost surely going to be a very challenging start to the season, just based on the schedule.
Well, again, you can only go on right now a small sample size, but as a further example of the way JJ Redick is throwing out things with specifics and the guys are listening and they're trying to meet those specifics. We talked about how the Lakers had 15 offensive rebounds in the win over Minnesota. To put that number in perspective, last season, the Knicks led the league with 12.7 offensive rebounds per game. So that's like 2-ish above that. And the Lakers last season were dead last in the league with 8.2 offensive rebounds. So Tuesday was nearly double. It's essentially the same team. And they did this against the Timberwolves team that was one of the best in the league last season for defensive rebounding percentage. And even with Karl Anthony Towns gone, it's not like you lose rebounding with Julius Randle. Dante DiVincenzo is actually a very good rebounder for a guard. And so the Wolves are not easy to do this against, like we keep saying many times and will until at least 10 or so games are in the books, small sample size. And I'm not predicting at all that 15.
And they are a smaller team now with Cat gone, obviously.
Right. And they're still figuring themselves out. And I'm not even going to remotely predict that 15 offensive rebounds is going to be the norm, but it's, again, indicative of the team listening. Like it was mentioned after the game that JJ Redick had told the team before the game started that last season, the lowest amount of turnovers against the Timberwolves, because they're very good at inducing turnovers, was 8. So they'd made it a goal to beat that. They ended up doing that. It was 7. So again, you are meeting a goal. And as a team that was not particularly good last year at taking care of the ball. So small sample size, but goals laid out and being taken seriously.
A couple other things to point out from Tuesday's game in terms of the supporting cast. Some interesting numbers and performances. We'll break all that down next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Game Time. The best concert I've ever seen in my life is George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, 1992, the Palladium in Hollywood. They played for 5 hours without a break. Ever since then, I've been chasing a concert that could top it. I've seen a few that came close. Prince, Neil Young, a different George Clinton show. But as I keep the search going, I'm always going to use Game Time because they make the process of getting tickets easier with features like Game Time Picks that filters out all the confusing verbiage, and they just show you incredible deals on great seats. They save you time, and that's what you want. Game Time also offers panoramic seat views before you buy, so you know exactly what the view to the stage is going to be like. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off.
I think one of the things. We should let people know, Andy, that the podcast that we run here has a newsletter form. Locked on Lakers is going to be a daily newsletter. Already is a daily newsletter. It's a one-stop shop. Catch up on everything happening on the podcast, other things happening in the NBA. We'll have polls on it, some other stuff, highlights from the show, some insights and things that we write, and all of that good stuff. If you want to subscribe to it, you can go to lockedondaily.com to subscribe to the newsletter. So
thank you in advance.
Yes. It's free, by the way. You don't have to pay.
Yes.
One of the things that is, I think, stuck out from the game, from the opener, was the 15 minutes that Jackson Hayes put out on the floor. 10 points. I think he had 5 rebounds. I clicked off the box score, which was really dumb, to be honest with you. But very active, involved in everything, and you noticed and felt his minutes on the floor. And it gets to a really critical issue, I think, with the Lakers and Redick, particularly in terms of analyzing how he's doing as a coach. Is he maximizing those kinds of guys? And he had a really nice game. I thought Connect played well, particularly in his first shift in the first half. So those two guys, I think, Rui had a great game. I think you can call him a role player on this team. And then like Max Christie, I didn't think was particularly great. Gabe Vincent was okay, but over the course of the season, obviously not all of those guys, Andy, are going to play great every night, because if they could, they wouldn't be role players. They'd be stars. But Redick's ability to maximize Christie, maximize Jackson Hayes, maximize Connect, maximize even guys all the way up through like Hachimura and D'Angelo and the players who aren't the stars, that's going to be where the Lakers hopefully can find another 10 or 15% of efficiency and improvement and quality in their rotation, because they didn't go get new players. They have to make the players they have better. And that probably means just playing to their strength and hiding their weaknesses as much as is humanly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, just for clarity's sake, it was 4 rebounds for Jackson Hayes, but 3 of them were on the offensive glass.
Yes.
And he helped keep a lot of possessions alive by either grabbing the offensive rebound or tapping it off a player from Minnesota. Just his general activity was really good. And I think generally I'm higher on Hayes than you are. Like I remember last year during the playoffs, I wanted Darvin to play him more, not because I don't think Hayes' imperfections that you find are real. I just think the things that he does well, this team often certainly lacked last season. I think you hit on it in part when you said like maximizing what they do well. And like, for example, not having Jackson Hayes in drop coverage all the time defensively, because that's not what he's really good at. He's actually, I think, much better in space for his size, like using his mobility. He's a really, really good athlete for that size. Obviously he finishes lobs incredibly well, but I actually think he has a little bit of utility as not a playmaker. Like he's not Nikola Jokic, but he can. I'm
interested where you're going with this.
But I think he operates well, like making a quick pass out of the short roll and stuff like that. Like if it, I do. And for what it's worth, I know I'm not alone in thinking this.
He's fine.
I think he is good enough if things around him are happening the way they're supposed to. I think he can read the play he's supposed to make. And again, I think there are ways that you can accentuate his strengths. And it's kind of the inverse of what we talked about with Connect before the season began, where he's the most established scorer they have off the bench, at least until Christian Wood gets back, or Vando's return flips Rui back to the bench, something like that.
But even then, I think Connect would be, and we'll get to Connect here in a second because I want to talk a lot more about him as well. Like even when Vanderbilt's available, Connect is still the most accomplished offensive player that's going to be.
Oh no! I meant if Vando came back, if they decided to flip Rui back to the bench.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
right. To give more defensive versatility to the starting five. Like Connect is clearly the best scorer they have, but we had talked about before. Some of what would keep him on the floor is what he does individually defensively, or finds a way to contribute on some end, but also the pieces you put around him.
Mm-hmm.
Connect and Hayes are kind of two different sides of, I think, the same riddle that you're looking to solve, or the same question that you have to figure out. In the case of Christie, the defensive pluses are, I think, very evident with him, but you have to find the best ways for him to contribute scoring. I think in the case of Gabe Vincent, figuring out exactly what it is offensively what his role exactly is going to be. I think it's a little bit fuzzy because I don't think he's really like a B+ level at anything offensively. I don't think he's terrible at anything offensively either, but I think figuring out his niche, unless he's just hitting threes at a high clip, which, I mean, if he does, great. But I think it's harder to figure out exactly what he does offensively.
And the timing of these things too, because you look at it, at least I look at it and I think, when a guy like Jackson Hayes plays well, let's say this, and this would be phenomenal, but let's just say like this is what you get. Like this is the Jackson Hayes of this year. That kind of activity, 7 to 10 points in 15 minutes, gets a few rebounds. So there's a temptation perhaps to be like, ooh, okay, well, we got to use him more. We got to figure out how to, how can we turn 15 minutes into 22 minutes or so, whatever it might be. And I think part of what is challenging about working with role players is the discretion that goes with, if, in finding that sweet spot. Like 15 minutes of the right stuff might be the best way to maximize Jackson Hayes, where you can put the exact right combination of players around him. You can start to call you can call the right sets. You can do this stuff. And again, you're not tilting what you're doing offensively and defensively just to him, but you're operating in an ecosystem that, as the partners that are on the floor, it makes sense. He works with all those other guys. If you try to bump that to 18 minutes, those extra 3 minutes might not be useful. 22 minutes, that extra 7 or 8 minutes might not actually be useful and could take away from the quality of those combinations. So yeah, that's another hard thing about managing people and players like this, is figuring out what that sweet spot is, because you might need to use the example of Connect. I really am. I'm kind of curious with Redick, like what's the leash that Connect gets, because you can see he clearly provides something that nobody else on the bench provides, and it's an important thing because he can score on 3 levels. So that's like a big deal, but he's going to have trouble defending at times. He's going to have to learn. The only way you learn is by doing this stuff. So how much leeway does Connect get to make mistakes? Because I think the upside on an extra 5 minutes on Connect is probably very different than an extra 5 minutes for Jackson Hayes. Like, I think you can get more out of, like, I think there's more space for somebody like Connect to continue contributing without that diminishing return. But you got to be willing to allow for a certain amount of mistakes to get there. I think the same is true, by the way, with Christie, who for all we forget, has not played very much in the NBA.
When we get back, I actually have what I think could be the answer in a lot of ways for all of them. They may be the same answer, and I'll explain why coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and then just watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Like, for example, this week, you could look at Justin Jefferson, more or less than 83.5 receiving yards, or Patrick Mahomes, more or less than 267.5 passing yards. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Prize Picks is also the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. So if your lineups stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. So collect your winnings also, if you happen to win, in 15 minutes. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA and you get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to get the $5 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game.
All right. Explain yourself, Andy.
When you're talking about the amount of leash that, say, Dalton Connect could have or Max Christie could have, I think Jackson Hayes is kind of in his own category because he's very different positionally in role. And also,
you kind of know what he is at this point.
Well, you know what he is at this point, but also, too, he's on a team where he's backing up the best player on the team. So other than matchup specific purposes, there are only so many minutes Jackson Hayes will get, or you even want him to get on a team with Anthony Davis.
Right.
And I think if Jackson Hayes has been a 15-minute a game player basically for his career. I think if you get 15 good minutes from Hayes, awesome. For real, I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
But as far as and
like I said, and I think there is a strong possibility of a diminishing return for trying to push it past that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, to say that he's a 15-minute player is not an insult. This is just that you can still be valuable. And I mean, right now on this team, Jackson Hayes is sneakily important.
Yes,
at least until Christian Coloco gets his clearance.
Yes, he is.
As far though as Connect and Christie, because you're talking about two players that profile pretty differently, but are also linked in their overall inexperience or just overall NBA playing time. I think to some degree they provide each other's leash. How Christie is playing and what you're getting out of him offensively could dictate how much of a leash or patience you would have with Connect with those defensive limitations, or vice versa. I think to some degree they're going to be affecting each other's tolerance from JJ Redick.
Well, and I think also in at least how I interpret what you're talking about too is are you putting Connect out on the floor with the right people? Are you putting Christie out on the floor with the right people? So that, I think we have seen at this point, Max is good at, or potentially good at a lot of things, but, point guarding is not one of them. It just hasn't worked well when you try to make Christie somebody up who plays more on the ball than off of it. And so are you putting him in situations where he needs to do that? And look, in garbage time, sure, get him the reps and that's fine and whatever. But in meaningful moments of the game, he should not be doing that. He should have a very narrowly tailored role that is very clear, that's very easy to execute, and that all the other people around him understand. Because I think one of the strengths of Christie is that he will go out and execute the game plan that is delivered to him. He will whatever the assignment is that Redick and the staff give him, Christie is going to go try to execute it. He said the same thing about Dalton Connect, but are you putting him out in the situations where his defensive liabilities, at least until he can start to shore those up, are being protected as well as possible. Finding those combinations is going to be critical. But I'd seen it a little bit in the preseason, but it stuck out to me, the difference that Connect sort of was making just with the skill set when he came out on the floor. And it has been a problem for the Lakers, especially once Rui moved into the starting lineup. Like when you go deep into the bench, there just isn't a lot of punch there.
Well, based on the way that Connect was drafted in the first round versus Gabe Vincent, second round or undrafted. I think undrafted. And Max Christie, a second round pick. Like when all three of them entered the league, there were different degrees of expectations for them. And also, I mean, I think in some ways the leeway that both Christie and Connect get can also be dictated by what you are either getting or not getting from Vincent, from Rui, from D'Lo, from Austin. I just have those guys in separate categories because they're much more experienced NBA players.
It is worth noting, at least to me, Dalton Connect is 2 years older than Max Christie. I mean, Christie obviously has the NBA experience that Connect doesn't, but in a lot of ways, it actually makes some sense that Connect, granted, his offensive profile is different and better than Christie's ever really was, but in some ways he should be a little bit more advanced and more polished and stronger and some of these other things because he's older.
He also spent a lot of time, like literal time, in college learning. Christie was a one and done, and both are fine. But like Dalton Connect went JUCO to Northern Colorado to Tennessee. Like that's just a lot of time, and especially Tennessee, learning under a guy like Rick Barnes. Like that's just a lot of knowledge that Christie, even 1 year at Michigan State, as great a program as that is, like you're not going to get this, you're not going to arrive with the same amount of knowledge. And then unfortunately last year, at least unfortunately from my perspective, Christie did not learn on the floor enough. I'm sure he learned a lot through osmosis just because he's a smart, attentive kid, but it's not the same thing as being on the floor.
I think when I think of Christie, and I just want to save a minute here at the end for the JJ Redick basketballs thing. Mm-hmm. But when I think of Christie, it's interesting. Like the comparison in a lot of ways to me is like across sports is like Anthony Richardson. And I'm not saying that Christie is the same prospect as Richardson. Nobody's looking at Max Christie as like the franchise savior in the same way that you look at Richardson, be like, that guy needs to develop into a franchise quarterback. Like that's what he's there to do, to be the centerpiece of an organization. But the thing that people forget about Richardson is he started like 18 games in his life or something like that. He started a remarkable, you're nodding because you drafted him first round in your fantasy league.
No.
Terrible.
I drafted him second round.
Sorry.
He was my 13th pick. My 12th pick was Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay. Right.
I had the wheel.
13th, and you're just like, yes, all of this is
big difference. Big difference.
No, you're right. You're right.
12.
And so, but you understand what I'm getting at. Like, it's easy.
I really understand what you're getting at.
Because he was so spectacular at moments last year before he got hurt. And, he can throw the ball like literally like 80 yards and just like some of the athletics.
Just to nobody in particular.
But to the quarterbacking stuff, like he has very little experience. Mm-hmm. And Christie is in his third year, but hasn't played a lot. And so the expectations, because fans are excited by him and because he's finally going to be given an opportunity and the Lakers gave him $32 million, I do think he needs a little bit of time and he needs a little bit of flexibility. So does Anthony Richardson. I think more time than your fantasy season will allow. But look how sad you are. He's very sad. But you understand what I'm getting? Like, it's easy to forget that Christie hasn't played a lot. Like, Connect really is more polished and developed in terms of like which guy is in some ways more NBA ready. It's an interesting comparison to me. The last thing I want to get is that there was a really interesting eye-catching or semi-viral moment at the end of Tuesday's game where Redick was talking about his disappointment in the basketballs that they were used. Thought that was part of the reason that the team shot so poorly from 3-point range. I don't know, were they using fresh basketballs in the preseason too? But he pointed out that he's going to make sure the NBA gives them used basketballs, not brand new. And he
eBay.
Right. He saw people laughing in the crowd. The reporter says, I'm dead serious about this. And everyone's like, we get it. We know. And he's right. There isn't a sport in the world where athletes like brand new stuff. Baseball players, rub the ball down before they pitch. Football players, they condition the ball. Nobody likes something straight out of the packaging. But it has been, Andy, chalked up to this, another example of JJ Redick and his obsessive attention to detail.
Yeah, and I think I think this is all coming from a genuine place of who he really is.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is an element of him playing it up a bit, accentuating this real part of himself, because I think Redick is savvy enough to recognize the value of this narrative of him being incredibly
It's not just the hearts and minds of the people inside the locker room that you have to win.
I mean, JJ Redick spent years in media. He understands this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, he said when people were laughing, you think I'm joking, I'm neurotic. Again, I think he is legitimately neurotic about this. I think he liked the idea of making sure everybody knew this. I'll put it that way.
I think that's right. And I think,
it's not a bad thing.
It's not. And I think he understands how important it is not just to get buy-in inside the locker room, but to have it outside the locker room too, in terms of lowering the noise and the temperature around him, and allowing him to do his job more effectively. I mean, as we're sitting down to record this, there's this clip of Kendrick Perkins on ESPN, and he was talking about how after that, going into that first game, he was ready to rip Redick and talk about it because he was critical of the hiring and all these other things. He was like, I thought it was a great game plan. I loved it. And all these other. This stuff matters. I think it matters not in the sense of is JJ Redick the next Pat Riley memes that are already starting to circulate. Some joking, if they go 2-0, they might be a little more serious. But Redick gets why it's important, not just that Lakers players think he's competent in doing a good job, but that the basketball universe also thinks this was a good hire and they're being run well, and it's all this other stuff. And he's right. It does matter.
You and I covered Phil Jackson for 5 years, and we saw up close and personal, there is a reason that no matter what was going wrong with the Lakers, nobody ever went for Phil Jackson's neck. Why? Not just the 11 rings. It was, dude was a master manipulator of media. Even for people like you and I, Brian, who I think were fairly good at seeing through a lot of it, you still see how it works.
Yeah. Master manipulator. When people talk about Phil working the refs, they didn't always just mean the game officials. Quick reminder about the newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com to subscribe. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel. Leave us questions. Leave us comments. We'll see everyone tomorrow.